What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Today I've got a special new edition of our podcast, Sippin' and Schemin' for you guys to enjoy. It's all about Tesla and Ethereum. Now you may be thinking these two sound like the most risky investments in the world. What do they have to do in common? Well, on the contrary, the more research I do is starting to uncover that Ethereum and its smart contract technology could provide huge benefits to some of the markets that Tesla is trying to enter, such as a decentralized energy system, such as autonomous vehicle technology on the Tesla network. There's a bunch of different ways that these futuristic products and visions could leverage the Ethereum blockchain to advance themselves and leverage that as the platform for how they work and operate. And so I just think there's a ton of exciting potential in how Ethereum and Tesla and their two visions could overlap. So I brought on a guest this week. His name's Alex, Hyperchanger. Shout out Alex for coming on. And we discussed, we have a 30-minute brainstorming session about all the different ways that Tesla and Ethereum could work together. This is my first time bringing on a guest and trying to get them on camera, so I'm sorry if it isn't filmed perfectly, but I think the content is awesome and you're gonna love it. Just to give you guys a little context, around 8 or 9 minutes in is actually when we start getting to the point of how Tesla could be leveraging Ethereum. The first 0 to 8 minutes or so are more about the background of Ethereum and why it makes sense as a platform and why we think it'll take off. And I think that's an important building block. But if you're already super into Ethereum, you already know all about it, you just want to get to the Tesla, theories, then you could skip to about 9 minutes in. I'm going to put a bunch of info in the description on different questions and stuff so you can navigate it easily. But anyway, hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Here it is. So Alex, why don't we start by saying what gets you excited about Ethereum in general? Why are you excited about the potential of Ethereum, and what kind of impact do you think it could have in society in kind of a bull case?
Yeah, so Ethereum is a really, really difficult technology to actually understand fully. I feel like in order to get to the point of understanding Ethereum, you really have to have an understanding of how blockchain works and what blockchain brings to the table. And what I always say to somebody who's first asking me, what does blockchain mean? I say that what the internet did to connectivity, the blockchain is going to do to trust. So anytime that you find yourself doing a financial transaction in which you have to say, oh, I trust this organization to do this properly. So when you're doing a bank transfer, for example, you pretty much say, deduct $1,000 out of my account, send it to someone else, and then it's just gone. You just see it out of your account, and hopefully it pops up in the next one. And if it disappears and you never see it again, you really have no recourse. So what Ethereum really brings to the table is this ability to create these really complex contracts where you can do certain operations using either current, the underlying ether, you can do it using tokens, etc. And you have total verifiability of it every step of the process. You know exactly what's being executed, when and where your assets are at all times. So how that connects with Tesla is I see Tesla interacting a lot with what I consider the outside world. So that's any interaction that Tesla has with a non-Tesla organization. And knowing Tesla, I don't think that they're going to want to go through financial intermediaries, credit card processing companies, etc. So really what attracts me to the Tesla Ethereum thesis is these use cases where Tesla is going to need to do financial transactions, and they're going to need to do a lot of them, and they don't want to go through the current system that there is now.
Let's start by exploring a use case that Tesla could have with Ethereum. For instance, I know a project that seems to be moving along is Grid Plus, and there's sort of this new dApp built on the Ethereum blockchain that's kind of about exchanging energy freely and a new way to trade energy, based on what current energy prices are. Let's say you have an excess in your battery, then you can sell it to the grid, or if the grid's super cheap, you can buy it from the grid and store it in your battery. So with those kind of things where there's a lot of transactions, complex changing prices, I know a lot of people feel like Ether or Ethereum is a great fit to kind of be the intermediary or the smart contract platform behind this new energy market, and that's what Grid Plus is building on top of. But so I'm trying to figure out why, in a scenario where a bunch of people have Tesla batteries in their homes, a bunch of people have solar roofs on their houses, why does Tesla need to tie into something like Grid Plus? Why can't they use the existing infrastructure to sell energy back to the grid? Why can't they have some software in the Tesla app that allows me to exchange energy with Tesla traders? Where's the value prop for Ethereum to come in here as really the back-end platform for these transactions?
So there's actually a number of benefits that I think Ethereum would bring to the table. So Obviously, the biggest one is trust. You have these power companies, you have consumers, and then you have Tesla. And you want to have a system in which no one party has control over the database, because there's this fear that, okay, well, if Tesla had total control, what happens if they start changing the prices between the bigger incumbent power players and the individual users who are purchasing the power? So that's the first benefit that Ethereum brings to the table. It's this total security that no one can be tampering with the database. But I think that another big one that we don't really see people...
Can we take a step back on the security thing? So like there's a database right now where people are selling energy back to the grid, and let's say like Tesla's managing that database. So why, or a private company. So why is it so much more important that this database is like more secure on the Ethereum blockchain? Where's the instability now, you know, that's the requirement for that sort of?
Yeah, so there are two sorts of things. So first of all, there is sort of a malicious tampering. Like, let's assume that this company that was running that database, and actually, like, one of the biggest examples of companies doing that was Enron. They really got into the energy market space back in the early 2000s. And one of the biggest issues is, like, what happens if they literally just start changing values? They start saying, oh, we don't have enough power out there, so we need to raise the prices, when in reality they do. And because they're the centralized gatekeeper, only they know the real answer as to what's out there. And they can take advantage of other parties. Okay. So that's the first one. But second of all, I just think like pure negligence. So when it comes to a smart contract that is written well, which is a big sort of if, you can really get this sort of purity to it. You know that you know exactly what's going in and you know exactly what's going out, and you don't have to worry about some party that can be hacked, that can be negligent. Like, look at Equifax, for example. Like, that's perfectly the issue with a centralized database. Even if that company was had the best intentions at heart, because they were managing the database themselves, if their employees mess up and they get hacked, boom, huge data leak. And when you're dealing with financial data associated with energy, that impact of the database being hacked or something like that has the potential to really like destroy a grid. What happens if someone hacked into the database and said, oh, we have no power, and then all of a sudden the price shoots up and people can't afford it? If in these sort of automated futures, that's a real problem that can potentially happen. So having it spread out on the blockchain in a way that's verifiable and untamperable brings huge benefits.
Yeah, and I almost feel like that's a risk that only gets more prevalent as we kind of have like more of an automated software-based energy system. Like, I feel like that only becomes more important, sort of like, even if it's less important now because it's sort of like a centralized grid that just sells power to people, as it gets more decentralized and we rely on that distribution of power, like that, it becomes more important maybe. So from like a financial transaction kind of standpoint, I know one thing we've talked about before is that like all this dynamic pricing, because of, let's say the wind's really strong, so there's a lot of wind energy, there's not much sun, like this is going to lead to really dynamic pricing in the energy markets. Mm-hmm. So what about Ethereum smart contract technology makes it so well suited to kind of handle that?
Yeah, so it's really conceivable to create an Ethereum smart contract that is completely open to everyone. And it says that given these inputs, so given how much power is currently being generated, what the demand is, and that will all be open, perform a very clear calculation on how pricing should work. And you can see exactly how that calculation is working. And as a consumer who will be dependent on this power, I mean, there's going to be people's lives that are dependent on that. Like, you can't have the power going out on a hospital, for example. Mm-hmm. We can sort of see and understand exactly how the market is working. And Ethereum is going to bring that sort of transparency to it. And that's exactly, I think, what Elon Musk wants. I mean, his goal is to move move the world forward in terms of green technology. And I think that energy transparency is going to be huge in that if you want people to buy in and get off of these traditional centralized methods like huge coal plants, for example. Having it so every consumer is educated and knows what's happening to their spot on the grid, I think will go a long way just towards culturally moving people towards renewable resources.
Okay, so now I'm glad you brought up like Elon's mission here. So to give a little context, like we all know Elon Musk started PayPal. We all know Peter Thiel was a co-founder there, and they had kind of had a big dream to like create a digital currency or some sort of internet-based currency technology. Whether they've actually fulfilled that mission, you know, there's a lot of questions around that. Is PayPal just a payment network versus the true disruptive force in banking that they wanted it to be? You know, I'd argue it's not. Really, it hasn't really achieved their grand vision. So, and linking that to the fact that Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, was funded by a $100,000 grant from Peter Thiel's foundation. You know, so Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are friends. He's an investor in SpaceX. So there's all these interesting connections of like Elon Musk and his friends, you know, with Ethereum. And then this is even more of a crazy conspiracy, but there's that picture on Twitter, which I'll pull up right now and I'll link to if you guys are listening to this, of like where Elon Musk drew on the Tesla screen, like a picture of a unicorn sort of like farting into a Tesla to power it. And you got your unicorn t-shirt on. Yeah. So I'm sort of like wondering, like, okay, how does this future work? Like, obviously Ethereum's super new. Elon doesn't want to attach himself to it right away. So like, how does this play out in your head? Like, is it the year 2019 where Ethereum has increased their transactions per second to a certain amount where it's starting to look really viable, that maybe, you know, this could be a solution for the energy markets? It can handle the capacity to at least do a small amount. Then we get some sort of app built on that. And then Tesla starts migrating its users to that app. Like, I'm just curious, like how should we be thinking and looking out for how does this actually start? Like, where does Tesla actually make the first move to get into Ethereum? Like, what's their play gonna look like?
Yeah, so I think it's highly likely that Elon Musk knows about Ethereum. Like, this guy is, he's been in the financial, you know, he's done financial apps. He knows about what money can do. Currently, he's obviously focusing on a lot of things, specifically, you know, transportation. Like, that's his goal right now. Space, cars, the Boring Company, you know, Hyperloop, etc. He's thinking about actual use cases that touch our world. I think that what Elon is waiting for is for Ethereum to prove itself to actually be able to scale. So we're still at this stage where there are a number of competing smart contract networks out there. So you have Ethereum, which is obviously the biggest, and you also have those like EOS, which has a different sort of scaling strategy as well. They're not using proof of work currently. They're having their own sort of proof of stake algorithm that they've implemented. You have Rootstock, which is a team actually trying to build on top of the Bitcoin blockchain another smart contract solution. So there's a number of them out there. So why do I think that that Tesla would eventually go with Ethereum? I think that if you look at the Ethereum roadmap, you look at that team that was there. I was out in DevCon. I saw a lot of the team members. I've learned about what Ethereum's scaling strategies are going to be, specifically with sharding and proof of stake. And I think that it's most likely that Ethereum will be the first smart contract platform that can actually really run at scale better than anything else out there. And what we're going to see is sort of this Metcalfe's law, where the more dApps that are out there, the more value the network will have.
And so even beyond the more apps, more networks, can you talk about like the scaling capacity and like, is that TPS, peak transactions per second, or like talk about that metric and scaling that and why that's so important?
Yeah, so it was really funny. When I was at DevCon about a week ago, there was this moment which I personally think is going to really go down in history, in which they brought up a graph of the transactions per second. And they were like, guys, we hit 7 TPS. And the entire auditorium went crazy. Like, this was a huge momentous achievement, just hitting 7 transactions per second on a global scale. And this is going to be like the moment that, you know, when people were talking about the internet, hey guys, we hit 56K dial-up speeds. Like, now we consider that, we take that for granted. But there's a number of solutions out there. They basically were just trying to say that, look, we've hit this milestone. There's still a long way to go. So there's a number of ways out there that they have to scale. One of them is changing the consensus model for the underlying chain to something called proof of stake. There's 2 implementations out there. There's Vitalik's.
So wait, before you get into that, we're at 7 now. Mm-hmm. Where do we need to get before, 7 transactions per second? I'm just trying to wrap my head around what is it we need for an energy market? Like 1 million per second? I feel like it needs to be a magnitude. So I just want to put a number on it so we could.
Yeah. So really the biggest number that we have right now is what is Visa's global TPS currently internally. Yeah. And that number is around 30 to 40,000 transactions per second. So this is what the Visa network is capable of doing on a planetary scale. Really what is going to be the big difference is this idea of like shards, which is where you have like a side chain that can do really high TPS, but has this connectivity with the main chain. So it's still really up in the air how it'll work, but theoretically they've been talking these side chains can do millions of TPS per second. It's way too early to tell actually how it'll work. We need to see some more experimentation and actually I think real academic lab work as to what these are capable of doing. But honestly, if we can hit Visa's scale, like 30, 40,000 TPS globally, I think that we can really start seeing some serious dApps.
So this is kind of an interesting number way to think about the progress of Ethereum is 7 TPS, and then you guys want to get, so going to 30,000, that's almost like, a 5,000 increase in the scalability, the amount of scale that is needed to actually get this to take off. And that, you're saying, that's what the Ethereum Foundation, that's what Vitalik, that's what these people are actively working on. That's the engineering challenge to scale it securely. That is really the roadblock before this becomes mainstream and people like Tesla can use it. Okay, so now that we kind of understand the challenge, I guess, let's assume that they succeed in this and that there is some scale, for the purpose of this exercise, and that Ethereum does scale beyond this and they can handle the amount of transactions here. One big use case is the energy markets that we've been talking about, but another really big one is this idea of autonomous cars and the framework around they make decisions. So maybe, how do you think Ethereum plays into that kind of logic and the future of autonomous cars?
Yeah, so the autonomous car DAO is something that people have been talking about for a long time. DAO. So DAO is one of the most interesting concepts to come out of Ethereum, or out of the smart contract universe in general. Okay. And this is this idea that you can program all of the functionality of a business into a smart contract itself that runs on the public chain. And then once you put that smart contract out there, it is distributed. It runs on every computer that's part of the blockchain. It is autonomous. It exists without any sort of central leader, and it's an organization. It can actually control certain objects that are on the blockchain. So people have been talking.
What does DAO stand for?
Distributed Autonomous Organization.
Okay, distributed. So it's sort of like a self-governing, sorry, keep going.
It's like a self-governing corporate organism, pretty much.
Okay.
And one of the ideas that people have been talking about is this idea of what happens if we could make every self-driving car a DAO. So what would that kind of look like? You have this. Is that exciting? Yeah, so you have this self-driving car and it rolls out of the factory and the car is programmed. And the first thing that it'll do is it'll try to figure out, okay, where do I need to go to pick up customers? So this car will decide that its best business is to run sort of like an Uber-like model where it picks up passengers and drops. Tesla network, exactly. Okay. So this car will then, first of all, make a query to the network saying, okay, where is the most projected growth in car self-driving rides? So it might decide on an urban environment like San Francisco, New York. It might also look and say, okay, based on these factors, I want to be a little riskier. I want to go towards more of an up-and-coming space, maybe something like Denver or Los Angeles. So the car will then make a decision where it wants to go, and then the car has a choice. It's like, okay, I just rolled out of a factory in, Fremont, California. How am I going to get there? Well, it can potentially contract out to a, transportation company, which the car can then drive onto another truck. The truck can deliver it to its location. And then once it's there, it basically rolls off the truck and it starts putting customer requests out there. It's connected to some app where customers can interact with it. Let's say it does that for a little bit. It's bringing customers along. It has some sensors in the car to figure out when someone's puked in it. And let's say that happens.
That's very important.
Huge
use case.
All this stuff. If we really want to do autonomous, it needs to have this. So let's say when it detects that, it's able to put out a request to the Ethereum network and say, okay, we need someone to clean this car. So it can then take bids. And this is what I'm talking about, why I think Ethereum would be so big, because it's Metcalfe's law. It needs to have, let's say, cleaning personnel on that network as well, so the DAO could talk with them and interface with them. Let's say
what's Metcalfe's law?
Metcalfe's law is really interesting. It says like the value of a network goes up on a square. So if you think about it, think about like Facebook, for example. Facebook isn't really valuable if there's 2 people on it. However, let's say there's 3 people on there. Metcalfe's law would say that the value is 3 squared, so it's 9. And what that means is that as the network grows in the number of participants, it grows exponentially. So a network with 1 million participants is exponentially better than a network with 100,000 participants.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling like in the energy market scenario, this is so useful because you want liquidity. I'm trying to sell energy. The more people that are on this marketplace, the better. Like it needs to have that network effect, like you're saying. And that just on a case of Ethereum as a whole, that's kind of, I think, why we're playing out the scenario of if Ethereum wins out here, it's almost like Tesla will not, like they'll have to build a dApp on the Ethereum platform because that's how everything will be transacted. So that's why we think they're gonna interact based on this, like the successfulness of this network effect that could happen with Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean that's like a position that people that's like really controversial in the blockchain community. It's this idea of maximalism.
Which is like one platform?
One platform to kind of rule them all. And there are some good arguments against it. There are some really good arguments in favor of it. I personally trend a little bit towards an ETH maximalist position, and that just simply because I work with the internet every day. In the beginning, in the 80s and the early 90s, there were a number of internet sort of World Wide Web competitors, things like Usenet, GopherNet. We don't use those anymore because it's too difficult to log onto it. You want to have everything talking on one protocol. And I think that ETH, if it can nail its scaling, will be that protocol.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like the faster we nail down one protocol, the faster we can all agree to say, let's start building stuff on it. Beyond like, let's fight on building stuff on different platforms and like trying to fight with scale like that. It almost like things will move slower in that fragmented way. And so that the way I kind of see this unfolding is whether it's a DAO with a car or the energy markets is once this hits scale, it'll hit the fact of like Tesla wants to get involved and it'll be in their best interest to push this as kind of the network where everybody transacts because then they can have the most liquidity for their consumers who are trying to sell energy, and they're going to kind of be a champion of like a partner of like, let's push Ethereum as this new way where anybody can transact in the energy economy because that unlocks so much value for our customers because then they can sell on this liquid market and transact, and that kind of unlocks a ton of value of our products. So they're sort of directly incentivized to get a network like this to take off because it makes the decentralized energy system so much more efficient. Because I feel like without a system of Ethereum kind of like this, it's really hard to imagine a world where we can transact energy kind of so freely, I guess.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Like, let's just look, for example, at the companies out there. You mentioned Grid Plus earlier. Grid Plus has spent a lot of engineering hours coming up with its solution. It has an IoT device that it's working with. It has relationships with energy companies, etc. I don't see...
So what is Grid Plus? Maybe pitch Grid Plus?
Yeah, so Grid Plus is a really recent startup that's actually based out of... It's connected with Consensus, which is a company that is in Brooklyn. It's a big it's called an Ethereum studio. A startup studio, and the idea is that it's just basically a bunch of connected Ethereum projects that can all build on top of each other and gain this network effect. And what Grid Plus is trying to do is it's trying to connect individual homeowners with the wholesale energy market. So just from a preliminary reading of their white paper and their YouTube video, they say that most of the time when we buy power, we buy it through this like intermediary that charges a huge markup for sort of price stability. And what Grid Plus will be able to do is they'll be able to manage our relationship directly with the main power company itself. And we can use their token to purchase power. I don't know, like, the one reason why I'm a little bit spotty on Grid Plus is they have a connection with an actual device that you need to put in your house.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Google Apple HomePod or Google HomePod kind of looking thing.
Exactly. And like, as a guy that like rents in New York, I don't think that I can go up to my landlord and be like, hey, can I install this pod, you know, like next to our, you know, power fuse box. I don't know enough about it, but that was the one thing that was like a little bit spotty for me.
Moonshot, probably.
Yeah, that's definitely a moonshot. However, like, I can see it in, you know, suburban environments in which you can actually afford to put the power roof, and you basically plug this thing in and then you sell directly to the power companies without having to go through a middleman. That to me makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so switching it up a little bit, let's just take a step back. I'm a Tesla investor. Are you a Tesla investor too?
Yeah.
Maybe? Yeah. So we both own Ethereum, we both own Tesla, so of course a little bias there going on.
Exactly.
But so like let's just say I'm a Tesla investor who doesn't know much about Ethereum, doesn't know much about this smart contract technology, but, you know, I get what Tesla's doing. They're selling electric cars, they're selling renewables. Like, why should I be excited about what Ethereum can bring to their business model? Like, what's this going to change about the thesis? You know, what does this unlock? Like, is this make it way easier for Tesla to monetize their autonomous cars because the DAO is the technology that unlocks that? You know, is this make it way more ROI positive to buy a battery on my house because the energy markets are so much more liquid because Grid Plus is facilitating this market? You know, like why should I get excited as just, you know, a Tesla shareholder of what Ethereum can bring to the company?
Yeah, I think that the reason why you should be excited is because thinking about how can Ethereum be an accelerant to what Tesla is trying to do currently. Tesla has a bunch of these on-the-ground direct goals that they want to achieve. They want people driving around in these cars. They want to have more miles run by electric cars than internal combustion engine cars. And I see a number of benefits that Ethereum can bring to that. I mean, just off the top of my head right now, the fact that every credit card transaction you have to do charges a 2.5% fee, a credit card fee, that's something that can go away with Ethereum. So immediately, as like a business owner,
but like as like a counterpoint, like there's going to be fees to transact on the Ethereum payment network if there is one eventually too.
Yeah.
So maybe they're like 1%. So that's a 1% price decrease. I mean, I guess that's a small price decrease on every ride, but like, is that enough to get excited about, or am I thinking about it in the wrong way, where Ethereum's all these kind of very back-end micro things that make everything have less friction? Or, you know, I just feel like that's not enough to get me excited. Of like, okay, they might pay using Ethereum. You know, I don't know. Is that enough of a...
Yeah.
To be devil's advocate here.
Yeah. So I would say that like where we're at right now is basically like we are at the 2002. Apple has just released OS X, and we're seeing this new compute platform, and the internet is really new, and Apple has just sort of come about or just had this resurgence with this new fantastic technology. I think that's exactly where we're at right now with Tesla and Ethereum. We basically have these two technologies out there. They're both going to absolutely impact the world. I think that Ethereum totally will, for a number of the reasons that you mentioned. And the reason why I see them connecting is just they're both the biggest in their respective environments. And I think that everything is going to be touched by smart contracts eventually. And Tesla is just so massive that there is going to be a connection somehow within the next few years. And going back to the Apple analogy, well, Apple ended up releasing the iPhone in 2007, and that absolutely revolutionized the way that we interact with the internet through a number of applications like, you know, think about Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder. All of these things are things that if you went back to 2002 before the iPhone was even invented, you wouldn't have even been able to conceptualize them. So my sort of bull thesis why I think that they're connected is they're just two massive ideas that are coming out there, and they're going to interact in some way. And we've gone over a few of those ways, but it's entirely possible that the real connection is something that we don't even know about right now. They're just both so big that they're going to connect somehow.
Awesome. All right, Alex. So to wrap it up, I'm thinking we need to give the hyperchangers a concrete prediction of like this time frame. We could see this application built on the Ethereum blockchain. Like, is it 2020 when I have a power wall and I can tap into Grid Plus and I can sell, you know, a certain amount of energy back to this liquid market? Or, you know, is it that there's a DAO that allows me to tap into the Tesla network and will drive me to my friend's house that's on the Ethereum blockchain? Like, when do we get the first use case of like, what's your prediction of the first time Tesla is plugged into either a dApp, they build their own dApp, or like something like that happens where Tesla and Ethereum are really working together in the real world?
I'm calling it 2020. I think that what's going to happen is we're going to see power companies and all the big players in that industry come together and agree on a blockchain standard. I think that Tesla is going to take a very active role in that. And I think that Tesla is going to push Ethereum because they understand good tech teams. Elon Musk knows what Vitalik is capable of. And we're going to see Tesla really pushing hard for a system built on top of Ethereum. Whether or not that will involve currently existing companies like Grid Plus, I don't know. But there's going to be some standard that'll come together, and it's going to be Ethereum, I think.
Excellent. And the reason why people would go to a standard there is because, I'm not sure if we touched on this or not, but is the liquidity aspect, the Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law.
Yeah.
Of you know, this is the network with everybody on it. It's in every player's best interest, whether your BMW goes into the battery business and Tesla does. They both want to push a standard where their customers have access to the most liquid market. And if that, and in that scenario, you're saying that's kind of why you'll think they'll come to a consensus and adopt one sort of blockchain as the backbone for this new energy infrastructure, and then everyone transacts on that sort of.
Oh, yeah. And I think, too, that if, from a more political angle, if we do ever see serious climate change legislation, either through like a confederation of states, kind of like what California, New York, Oregon, Washington is doing, potentially with Canada as well, is they're going to legislate an actual standard for companies to operate on. Wow. So,
and so would that be Ethereum, or would they create their own blockchain, or?
That's entirely up there.
That seems like a fascinating debate on itself.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be Ethereum just because it's technologically the most like the most advanced. I mean, you look at things like the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and these are huge companies. I mean, if you look through the roster of companies on that, pretty much all the big players. The Enterprise Ethereum Alliance is sort of a federation of different companies that are working to create enterprise use cases for Ethereum. So a lot of the time what that is in practice are private blockchains, but the goal of the EEA is to make sure that all those private blockchains can always communicate on the public network. So to maintain that compatibility between them. Yeah. So I can see that as being the big moving force behind agreeing on the
Ethereum enterprise.
Yeah, and it's not like it's unheard of. Like, whitehouse.gov is on the internet. I mean, you have so many government services that can only be accessed via the internet. So in a way, it's not out of the realm of possibility that the government will mandate certain, or will be driven towards certain technologies that have a lot of users.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also interesting. We've seen Russia's rumoring to launch the crypto ruble. I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent, but apparently, you know, the CEO of Citibank was just saying at a Bloomberg conference he expects nation states to launch their own version of their fiat currencies as digital currencies. And, you know, that to me, like, I'm hearing this and I'm like, wow, this is the biggest validation we've heard of the digital asset crypto space, is these nation states are saying, wow, like, we need to get our own, you know, on one thing they're going to compete with Ethereum and Bitcoin, but on the other hand, like, they're validating that disruption.
Yeah, I don't consider them competitors at all. I mean, maybe they could be considered more competitors to Bitcoin, but what Ethereum is fundamentally providing is a smart contract platform. So actually, these crypto rubles, crypto dollars, if they become, I would say they're fantastic for Ethereum because it's an easier way to bring liquidity into the market. No longer do you have to go through Coinbase, for example, to charge your credit card or charge your bank in order to get your dollars on there. No, you can just bring dollars, crypto dollars, directly into the market. And that'll be fantastic for anyone that's a crypto holder when those things start coming out.
And where do you hold your Ethereum?
I hold my Ethereum on a combination. I have half of it on a private wallet, and I personally use a paper wallet for that. I really like the simplicity.
You have your key written down on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I have my key written down on a piece of paper. There's a number of strategies out there. I mean, tangentially, I'm not the biggest fan of a hardware wallet because hardware wallets, like, let's think 10 years in the future. Like, what happens if I don't have a USB port on my computer in the future? I don't want to figure out how to plug that in or deal with that. What happens if there's a hardware bug that causes my private keys to be lost on there? Well, what the hardware manufacturers say is, oh, but you have a backup seed that you've saved. And I'm like, okay, fine, a paper wallet. So I use half on a paper wallet, and then I keep half of it in exchanges. So if I want to make moves on the market, if I want to be able to go quickly, I can just trade directly from there.
Interesting. Fascinating. All right. Awesome. I think that wraps it up. Super stoked to have you on the podcast, Alex. Maybe we can do it again, talk about Ethereum. Definitely. This was awesome. So thank you. Any last words or anything you want to say?
No, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Guys, comment, questions, subscribe. All of your thoughts and ideas on how Tesla and Ethereum are going to work together, what dApps we should be following that are leading this charge. Like, we want to know it all. So please let us know in the comments. Thank you guys for tuning in. That's SIPPIN and SCHEMIN. See you guys next time. Peace.